welcome to today's episode of Life Purpose by Design. On today's episode, we want to talk about something that everyone has and often aren't too shy about using them, and that is opinions. But we want to move from just having an opinion to a deeper dive of having a perspective, because often our opinions about matters of life don't always measure up to life's realities. So join our conversation where we talk about a matter of perspective. There's a familiar saying that everyone is entitled to their opinion, and our opinion represents our natural viewpoints from our lived experiences or personal preferences about something or someone. And sometimes it's just not about our opinions about ourselves, but it could be opinions about someone else. And maybe it's a decision that they've made. So I want to talk about our opinions. It's a belief that we have, but it's a little stronger than just an impression about something. You know, some things we may just have an opinion about an outfit that we see in the store, and we may have an impression that, this is good, this is bad, this work, this won't work. But I want to talk about opinions from a deeper level because it's stronger than an impression, but it's not as strong as positive knowledge. And not that all opinions are negative, but sometimes if we're not careful, our opinions can come from a negative lived experience that we have, and we may inadvertently apply that negative experience onto someone else when they're either seeking our opinions about something or we are volunteering to give them our opinion about something. So opinions are voiced with, generally, this is not all times, generally there is a lack of ownership. We may start off the conversation by saying, it's just my opinion, or the infamous, if I was you, I think I would. And so when we think about opinions, sometimes there's not an ownership for the responsibility that goes with that opinion, and the risk that the person that we are offering the opinion to may have to assume if they respect our opinions, they respect our viewpoints, and they decide to make a decision to take an action just based on an opinion that we may have offered them. But it's almost second nature for us to make quick opinions, and sometimes those opinions are spoken, sometimes they're unspoken, which sometimes are the best kind of opinions, so that we can take time to really process whether or not the viewpoint that we're offering is appropriate, is the timing right, more importantly, did the person even ask us for our opinion? So we offer opinions sometimes when it's triggered by something that we may observe through the lenses of our values and our expectations. And so that's where the statement sometimes, if I were you, because we're looking at our values and our expectations, and we are offering those viewpoints to someone else. Another saying that we have is, if I want your opinion, I'll ask you for it. So I want to ask you a question. How many times in the past 30 days have you asked someone about an opinion about something that was very important to you? So in the last 30 days, did you have opportunities to ask someone their opinions, and did you take advantage of those opportunities? And then ask yourself, did you sincerely want their input? Or did you just feel compelled to at least offer them an opportunity to have a voice? And sometimes we ask for opinions based on the relationship that we're in. So in a marital relationship, we probably ask for opinions and input a lot, but maybe it's on your job, maybe it's in your relationship with other family members, or even with a friend. But did you really want their opinion, or did you feel compelled to ask them for their input? So think about your reason for asking for the input for the person. And did you really want their opinion? Or did you want something deeper? Did you want their perspective? Did you want them to draw deeper than just having a thought? And did you want them to draw maybe deeper into more of a knowledge-based feedback to you based on not just what the first impression was, but maybe there is something that they could either process, pray about, get back with you later on to make sure that the information that's being provided is meaningful. So perspective is a little different from an opinion. And the differences may seem subtle, but it's there. So they both are shaped by our cultural beliefs. They both are influenced by our lived experiences, our experiences with family, with work, with communities, and even with ourselves. And just different things that we deal with, just dealing with us, we may form different opinions about ourselves, about our strengths, about our weaknesses, about our personalities, and just different areas of life. And we have these self opinions. But perspective has a Latin root meaning to look through, to talk about mindset, an vantage point, and an outlook. So it's more than an impression, it's actually involving a mindset, function of our minds when we come to perspective, because we are processing information and then we're using that processing to hopefully layer it with wisdom. And then we tend to share our perspectives on a particular situation or circumstance. So I want us to look at the biblical dynamics of perspective, because just like opinions, our perspectives are influenced by our lived experiences. But like I said, it takes a deeper dive, and it's influenced by spiritual truth when we're looking at a biblical perspective. So having insight, seeing and knowing something through the lenses of our faith. So we have the advantage of having our faith as an extra layer over our natural viewpoints and our lived experiences. I like to say opinions are optional. Again, you may offer them and someone may or may not receive them. But perspective, it's not. It's really necessary. And I want you to think about something in the Bible when Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And then he turned around and said, "Who do you think that I am?" So Jesus was acknowledging that both opinions and our perspectives about a common truth, Jesus and his identity, can be very different, even though the truth itself remains the same. So our perspective should always be enlightened by the truth of God's word. Our perspective should always be enlightened by the truth of God's word. I want to share with you briefly a personal experience I had around perspectives. So about 28 years ago, I was attending a business workshop for how to deal with difficult employees. And when I attended the workshop, I was seated next to this very handsome gentleman. And so we had to do a number of activities where we had to kind of decipher what our leadership styles were and how we would deal with different situations. So based on the pretest, they assigned us to work groups. Well, this handsome gentleman that was sitting next to me ended up in my work group. And so when we broke out into work groups, we had to pick a work group facilitator. And so both of our hands went up at the same time. And so the group voted for us to co-facilitate this group. But as we went through the work group, we would come up with different situations about how do you handle different conflicts with employees and how do you do it in a proactive way, in a strengthening way for the employee to grow. Um, and this handsome gentleman would offer his ideas. And I, not intentionally, but I just found myself saying, well, that's a good point, but another way of looking at it is. And so it almost seemed like everything that he offered as a suggestion, I would end up saying that's a good point, but another way of looking at it. And we went back and forth, not in a conflict way or an antagonistic kind of way, but I realized that we were just dealing with the exact same situation, but we just had different perspectives for how to deal with it based on our leadership style and based on our experiences. So, and it wasn't just our perspective that mattered. There were other participants in the groups. So we would kind of vote on what direction we wanted to go. And interestingly enough, a lot of the final votes landed with the perspectives or the recommendations that I was making. It wasn't that I knew more than this handsome gentleman that was in the group. It's just that we just had different perspectives. So fast forward a little, that handsome gentleman actually became my husband, and we've been married for over 20 years. And it's interesting because that's the one thing that he remembers the most about when we first met. And so there are times when we are discussing something and he'll just say sarcastically, but in a loving way, that's a good point. But another way of looking at it is, so we still have our, that's a good point, but another way of looking at it is moments. And I'm going to plead guilty that the majority of those moments, those words are being shared by me versus by my husband. And part of it is because we are built very differently. We process information differently. And so I like to kind of turn things upside down, look at it from every angle. I like to do, strength-based analysis of a lot of things. And so my husband is more of, okay, let's look at what we have here. Let's make a decision and let's go forward. But the good news is our having and being shaped by our lived experiences in leadership and other life experiences and getting to those, that's a good point. But another way of looking at it is, it's the foundation for the success of our marriage because we respect each other's perspectives and we use the few of our varied life experiences to help us make decisions in support of each other's. So even though our picture on the PowerPoint is kind of rotated the wrong way, somebody may say it's the wrong way. Somebody may say, oh no, it's just a side view. Again, it's depending on your perspective, because another way of looking at it is that it's not turned the wrong way, but it's turned the side way. So, but if the truth is told, we don't always welcome everyone's opinions about our lives. Sometimes we just want to make our decisions based on our experiences, based on the best information that we have. And getting people's opinions sometimes may complicate our decision-making process. But there are times when we look to our inner circles of influences where we can seek their input on different matters. We may look to our family, our coworkers, and our prayer partners. And interestingly enough, social media, I'm seeing a lot of polling that's going on social media to get input from others to help people make decisions. And I've seen everything from should I buy this to what should I name my business or what should I name my ministry. And so there are a lot of different ways that we can tap into other people's lived experiences and get their opinions and also get their perspectives. The world's viewpoint or perspective is that it's all about what's happening to me. The biblical viewpoint is it's all about what's happening through me. And Joel Osteen says, nothing happens to you, it happens for you. See the positive in negative events. So we can go through life thinking everything's happening to us, and we can say everything is happening through us. It depends on what your perspective is. Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Again, going back to that word perspective, mindset, vantage point, outlook. So the biblical viewpoint or perspective transforms how you think, how you see, and the process of what is happening, not just in your life, but through your life, through Christ and your relationship with him living in and through you. So I want us to look at a biblical example of a matter of perspective that's found in John 4:7-42. And this is where we look at the Samaritan woman or the woman at the well. So our conversation starts with an encounter that she has with Jesus at the well. And Jesus is traveling through Samaria and he's on his way to Galilee and he sits down at the well because he's tired. and he's thirsty and he wants to drink. So he sits at the well, and at the well, he encounters the Samaritan woman coming to draw water from the well, and this is at noon. So, a little profile about the Samaritan woman, according to the cultural perspectives in which she lived. She was unnamed, so she's applicable to all of us. I love when we run into unnamed people in the Bible because sometimes I can identify more with the unnamed people because they're more universal to our lives, lived experiences. Culturally, she represented a lower class of citizenship, being a female and also being a Samaritan, which were despised by the Jews. She was living in shame in social outcast. She'd been married a couple of times. And later in the verse, it talks about Jesus telling her, even the husband that you're living with right now is not even your husband. But despite all of that, despite other people's opinions about her because of her nationality, because of her gender, all of that, man's preconceived opinions about her worth and her acceptance of their opinion. She came to the well at noon because that's the time when people like her came to the well, when all of the respectable women would have came early in the morning or late in the evening. But she came during her allotted time, which was at noon. But all of those opinions and all of those perspectives landed her at the well at the exact time for a face-to-face with Jesus. So what I want to say to you that sometimes our opinions of ourselves and other people's opinions of us and how it impacts us can land us right at face-to-face with Jesus as we're seeking out, truth about, what someone has said, what their impression was about us. And you're digging deeper to say, Jesus, who do you say that I am? And I want to encourage you that whenever someone offers an opinion, it could be a good opinion, it could be a bad opinion, always seek the true source of who your identity is. And that identity can only be revealed to you through Christ and your relationship with him. So just like the Samaritan woman, she came to draw her water. Jesus asked her for a drink. And the woman was surprised because she's like, Jesus, you're a Jew. You all don't have anything to do with Samaritans. So why are you asking me for a drink? So her opinion or her perspective was based on her lived experiences. First, I'm a woman. You shouldn't even be talking to me. Second, I'm a Samaritan and you're a Jew. And you should not even be interacting with me. So I want to ask you a question. Have you experienced feeling out of place or not measuring up because of someone's opinion or lack of acceptance of you as a person? That, hey, I'm out of place here based on what someone thinks of me. I'm not measuring up based on someone else's criteria for success. Or maybe they just don't accept you. Maybe you're not invited to the tribe. How has someone else's opinion influenced you? And again, I want to go back. Opinions are optional. Perspectives, which is truth, which can come from God and come in through us from God, is the thing that is necessary. So Jesus replied to her, if you only knew the gift of God, the gift that God has for you and who you were speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water. So while the woman had her perspective based on other people's opinions, Jesus' perspective of the Samaritan woman is he saw someone who needed a father's love, who needed forgiveness, who needed redemption, and who needed grace. And that's how he sees us, as someone who needs a father's love, someone who needs forgiveness, someone who needs redemption, and someone who needs grace. And that's why God sent his son Jesus to the earth, because he had an outlook and he knew where we were and he knew that we needed, salvation through Christ. So the Samaritan woman, like the rest of us, begins to transfer her sense or her opinions of inadequacy onto her perspective of who Jesus is. And do we do that because someone tells us or we think we don't measure up? Then we try to convey that or transfer those thoughts in how we see other people. Because if I'm not measuring up or if something's wrong with me, then certainly something has to be wrong with you. So she takes her inadequacies based on other people's opinions of her and she starts to question him. So she says, "Sir, you don't even have a rope or bucket. This well is very deep. Where would you get this living water?" Because she's thinking in the natural perspective that he's asking for what she was very familiar with, and that was the natural water. She had no idea that Jesus was offering her something a lot deeper than the well at which they sat. And then she says, "Do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and even his animals enjoy?" So Jesus says to her, "Anyone who drinks of this natural water will soon thirst again. But those who drink of the water that I am giving will never thirst again." So he is shaping her perspective and he's trying to open her up to have a different outlook versus what she was accustomed to. So, from a kingdom perspective filter, she operated from the natural perspective, trying to satisfy her natural physical thirst from what she was familiar with, the well water. Jesus operated from a spiritual perspective, satisfying her spiritual thirst from his well of life. Isaiah 55, 8 through 9 is something that helps us shape our perspective when we're trying to see things through the lenses of faith. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So is there an area in your life where you settle for what's norm, for the natural, versus God's perspective of what is promise or what is the supernatural? Maybe it's an entry level position at work versus God has a plan for your promotion. That's just a stepping stone to where he wants to take you. Maybe it's just getting by versus God's plan in Ephesians 3, 20 through 21. Those more than you can possibly ask, think, or imagine. It's just a matter of perspective. Or it's so hard, I can't possibly do this. Versus Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." We have to shift, go move from our opinions to God's perspective and God's truth if we're truly going to experience what he has best for us. So sometimes we have to shut out the noise of our self opinions and definitely the opinions of others. And I'm not saying that you don't ask for input, you don't ask for feedback, but just make sure that it's done in a way that's healthy, that builds you up, that one gives you truth as truth is known. So the Samaritan woman's opinion of her lived experiences in sin clouded her vision from the reality of who it was that was sitting directly in front of her, Jesus, the Messiah, and what he had in store for her. She saw Jesus as a Jew who shouldn't even associate with her, thought he came to the well not well prepared. He didn't have a rope, he didn't have a bucket, yet he was asking for something to drink. She offered her opinion about Jesus' motives, questioning whether he thought he was better than Jacob by even offering her a water that was different from what she was accustomed to. And again, we can become so accustomed to the opinions of others that we lose track of our true identity and the ability to tap into that whisper, that voice where God is trying to speak to us. And he's trying to say, "I know they said that, but this is what I'm saying." So let's fast forward a little bit. Again, opinions are optional, perspective matters. But finally, thankfully, her opinions of herself and what others thought about her or acted towards her, she shifted into a matter of perspective gear. She's sitting face to face with Jesus. He's offering her something she's never heard of before. And this is someone who normally would not even be in the place that she's at. So she shifts her gear and she has a different outlook. The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" She goes from, "Who are you and why are you even talking to me like, but could you be the Messiah?" There was something that shifted. Whenever we have an encounter with Jesus, something will shift. Our perspectives will shift. We can't be in his presence. And his presence is because, as a believer, the Holy Spirit is dwelling within us. So our perspectives can't stay the same. As we encounter him through the word, through prayer, something is going to make a shift. And we have to be open to accepting and seeking out what that shift is. We have to dig deeper. She got to experience the biblical viewpoint on perspective that it's not what's happening to me, it's all about what's happening through me, through her experience with Jesus. It's not about what's happening to you, whatever that situation or circumstances that you're dealing with, it's about what's happening through you. I want you to open yourself up to that. Finally, she experiences Jesus' love, his truth, his redemption, and his acceptance operating in and through her. Colossians 3:1-3 says, "Since you have been raised with Christ, set your heart on things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things." That is where our perspective comes because it gives us personal awareness, it gives us spiritual growth, and it impacts our relationship. You know, another way of looking at it, that led to my husband and I he was my husband at the time, but that sparked an interest where we had follow-up conversations. He invited me to lunch. And so he tells me on the back end that I just wanted to get to know this woman who had so much to say. So sometimes you never know. By sharing your perspectives, you never know what the outcome is going to be. For me, let's just say that by sharing my perspective, it all worked out pretty good. So the diversity of each of our perspectives, the biblical view or the worldview, if you're not a believer and you have more of a worldview perspective, it still creates opportunities for personal awareness, our spiritual growth, and impactful relationships in our communities of influence. Because not only did the Samaritan woman receive salvation and had a perspective shift based on her encounter with Jesus, but she ran back and told an entire town. She went back to the exact same people who had the negative opinions of her, who had a less than perspective of who she was and of her work. But because she had a different perspective, she then took that perspective and it gave her a boldness and a courage to go back to those same people and to enlighten them because now she has wisdom. And that's one of the filters of between opinions and perspective is wisdom. So because she was influenced of her perspective of her worth and her encounter with who Jesus was, the people became open. They saw her as a total different person. So the people came streaming from the village to see him, and many Samaritans believed. And they said to her, "Now we believe, not just because of what you told us, not just because of what we thought might have been your opinion, but because we have heard him ourselves. Now we know that he indeed is the Savior of the world." And that's the point that I want you to stick with. Sometimes people have opinions, and we can't be too quick to believe what people are sharing of an opinion. But when we are able to process all that information, all the opinions, all the perspectives, and we are able to hear for ourselves, to process for ourselves, to seek God for ourselves, to seek his word for ourselves, to seek his wisdom for ourselves, then we can know indeed what God's plan, what his purpose is, and what the promises of God is for our lives. So some key takeaways from the Samaritan woman's having a different perspective experience and moving away from the opinions of others. One is Jesus' love, his acceptance, and his forgiveness supersedes her and our past mistakes, our self doubts, other opinions of our worth. We can make a difference for others to believe and accept salvation through Jesus Christ. The good news of Jesus Christ was first proclaimed to the people of Samaria through the testimony of the woman who was transformed by Jesus' perspective. The very person that they rejected and downcasted was the person who brought them the good news. Jesus sent other people to Samaria, but the Bible commentary says the good news were first preached in Samaria by the Samaritan woman. And lastly, remember God's eternal perspective, his vantage point, his outlook will always surpass our natural realities. I want to encourage you that be open to information, but more importantly, make sure that you are seeking and open to the truth that can only come through your relationship with Jesus Christ, the Word of God, and spending that quality time seeking His face, seeking His guidance about, what is this decision that I need to make? There's no other way to get it, because even after you get all those opinions, you still got to take that somewhere. And so I want to encourage you to take all that to the very feet of Jesus and let him help you sort through all the different informations and the feedbacks that you're getting. Like the Samaritan woman, when you have gained a perspective from God, what is the guidance and directions? Then use that perspective to influence others around you. Thank you so much for joining us here at Light Purpose by Design for our conversation on the matter of perspective. And I pray and hope that your perspective of the Samaritan woman has grown. This is really, it gave me a different way of looking at the Samaritan woman and how her experiences can influence my lived experiences. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you next time here at Light Purpose by Design.